Night story. I heard your story the other day where you mentioned something related to a mass grave. And it's true, these places have a supernatural force. Something very terrifying happened to us when, without knowing it, we ended up living on top of one of these places. When I was a child, due to life circumstances after fleeing as displaced people, we had to settle for living in an invasion, a squatter settlement. We practically lived in shacks held up by sticks, blocks, plastic, and cans that kept piling up as each person marked out what would someday be their family's property, if they managed to get the title. Over time, after several clashes with the police, the mayor trying to kick us out, an illegal armed group, and a man, who we later found out was a cousin of the mayor's wife, trying to act like he owned the land, they had no choice but to let us stay there and set up our shantytown. The story is long, but I'll try to summarize it as much as possible. Like any squatter settlement, the main problem, beyond housing, was access to public services, especially water. We got it from a stream about 45 minutes away. To not take even longer, we had to cut through the back of a cattle rancher's property. As soon as he found out we used that route to shorten the path, he put up a tall fence with wires that supposedly were electrified. No one dared to check. It was then, while looking for an alternative, that we found some abandoned wells on the other side of the settlement, much closer. A landowner had left them abandoned because they supposedly ran him out of town for witchcraft, though it was also rumored the man had been killed. Everyone knew that story, which is why people were reluctant to get water from there. But we had no choice. Since we left early to sell empanadas on the highway, it fell to us to go there every night to get water for the next day. It was on one of those nights that what happened, happened. We had gone, just my dad and me, because my uncle, who also lived with us, had fallen into a fever after an accident at that very well and was in bed talking nonsense. I remember him telling us, "They've put a curse on us in this town." We thought they were deliriums, that he must have been bitten by a dangerous animal. That time, we arrived at the well with the wheelbarrow and our 4 jerrycans to fill. My dad was the one who would go down into the hole with a bucket and bring up water, while I would receive it and fill the cans. On one of those trips, I felt my dad fall. You could barely see because it was so dark at that hour. All I felt was him slip and the water spilled. At that moment, I ran to look over the edge to see what had happened, and he yelled at me not to come down, to go back to the settlement to get Senor Marcial, a neighbor who was like a community leader. People respected him because he knew a lot. I told him I wouldn't leave him there alone, but he insisted I go while he complained. I could barely make out his silhouette in the darkness, in the middle of the water. But there was something strange. In front of him was another silhouette moving back and forth, a bit smaller and elongated. It looked like a snake, but at the same time, it also looked like a thin person. "Dad, did a snake bite you?" I asked, scared. "You can see it?" he asked me. "Yeah, I can see it from here." "I'll find a vine to get you out," I said. "No, no, 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 no," he said, desperate. "Find Marcial and tell your mom to send the black sheet I have under the bed." "Dad, are you okay?" I asked him. He said yes, but told me to hurry up. When I returned with Senor Marcial, we were about 5 meters from the well and could hear my dad arguing with someone. At that, Senor Marcial grabbed my shoulder and told me to stay there, not to go look. He tied the black sheet around his left arm and jumped into the hole. I was lying on the ground, not daring to look, listening to them yell and curse at each other. Something bad was happening because Senor Marcial was telling my dad to calm down, not to let himself be provoked, that he was there now. But my dad kept screaming insults and vulgarities. I don't know how much time passed, an hour maybe, but I started to feel a strange sleepiness and I felt my body heating up as if I were burning with fever. Shortly after, Senor Marcial came out, dragging my dad by the collar of his shirt while he kicked and screamed like a possessed man who wanted to go back into the well. It wasn't his voice, but it was coming from his body. When they were completely out, they both fell silent and my dad started talking in a low voice, a bunch of words that made no sense, as if it were another language. "Do you know the creed?" Marcial asked me, shining a flashlight he had tied to his pants in my face. "Well, start praying it, and no matter what happens, don't stop praying," he told me. I crawled to where they were, got on my knees right next to Senor Marcial, and the two of us started to pray while my dad, sitting down, kept swaying his body and saying things we couldn't understand. Suddenly, we began to hear something in the well start splashing water, as if someone was throwing stones into it. Marcial just patted me on the shoulder so I wouldn't lose concentration and would keep praying. And it was about 5 minutes later that the worst happened. Everything turned cold. I didn't really see what it was, but I felt something rise up in the middle of us, right where my dad was. It was a strange presence, a shadow that wouldn't let us breathe. It was dragging its feet in the mud, gasping, and saying a kind of prayer in another language. I didn't dare open my eyes, but I could picture it. I don't know why, but in my head, I saw it as a decrepit man with wet rags moving slowly. At one point, I even felt it pass behind us. It fell silent, with its head over ours, and several drops of water fell on my forehead. It was one of the most horrible sensations of my life because every second I felt my heart stop. I thought about running, but my knees were practically nailed to the ground. And perhaps it was the same fear that made me stay quiet and stop praying. Senor Marcial, noticing, just hit me with his clenched fist in the center of my chest while he kept saying the creed. But I couldn't think clearly, much less say anything. In my mind, there was only that presence and its words. I heard them getting closer to my ear, almost like a whisper. And I don't know if it was a delirium, but for a second I could even understand what it was saying. I come for you, son of the last star, bomb of blood, son of pain. That's what it said. It repeated it over and over, and each time, my face burned as if I were in front of a fire. Right then, my dad reacted and grabbed my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked me. When I opened my eyes, Senor Marcial was standing up, looking at me. Almost by inertia, I started saying the creed out loud. Then my dad hugged me. "I warned you it wasn't a good idea to come down here," Marcial was saying to my dad. "But the things of the dead are sacred," my dad replied. "And that man is surely bound here. You can feel the pain. Look, I recognize a curse when I see one, and this here isn't just any well. Look, your brother is down with that strange fever and talking crazy. I bet it's the same thing." At that moment, my dad passed his hand over his left leg and realized he was bleeding. And sure enough, the next day he also came down with a fever. It was then we realized he had the marks of several bites on his body. But the marks weren't from a snake or any other animal. They were like a person's teeth. His legs were bruised, his back full of scratches, his face swollen. He was unrecognizable. I thought he was going to die. If it weren't for Senor Marcial, who every afternoon would put some herbs on his head and pray over him, my father wouldn't have made it. He said my dad had the cold of the dead, and that's really bad because it slowly consumes a person. They relocated us from there about 6 months later through a government program because they found a mass grave right there. But it was near the well where they found the strangest thing. They say there was a large jar buried with a completely black skull inside. The most horrible part was that around it, forming a triangle, they found many little black cloth bags, and in each one a piece of human flesh. And no one knows how, but it supposedly had been there for several years, and yet the flesh looked as if it had just been buried.